Yeah.
Okay. Let's try again. Hi, friends, potential friends. We've come together again as writers who have met through the AWLC and eventually decided to form 2 writers groups. That's what the AWLC does, allows us to discover and use our various talents. We in the writers group knit words. No long intro or explanation is needed. Tonight, 9 of us share our writing with you and hope you will be entertained. Dina Tobin will start us off and put us into the mood with her wonderful 3 haiku. Take it away, Dina.
Thank you, Rose. Oops, hold on. Excuse the technical difficulties. So, as Rose said, I'm going to read 3 haiku.
Will you share the document, please?
Oh, you don't see it. Okay, you see it now?
Yeah.
All right. So just a little background on what haiku is. Traditionally, it was a 3-line poem with 5, 7, and 5 syllables, but in recent times, they've become more flexible in the structure, so you can have more or less than those numbers of syllables. And I find it is a good sort of introduction to poetry, and if you like to try your hand at poetry, it's a fun way to start. So these are 3 I wrote recently. The first one is a little bit of an homage to Billy Joel. I've been listening to a lot of his music lately, and I came up with this idea when I was crossing over the East River on the Manhattan Bridge, and on a clear day you can see down the river and the Brooklyn Bridge and the Statue of Liberty in the distance. New York state of mind.
Will you move it on?
Yeah. Shimmering water, the Statue of Liberty shining, waves to me. The second haiku is a little bit sadder. It's about my relationship with my older son. Memories of you. Broken wings, adieu. Your pilot dreams, my heart aching. Son, I miss you so. And the final one I wrote several years ago when I was living in Lima, Peru. And if you've ever lived in an apartment building in Lima or in other cities, you know you can hear your neighbors. Lima morning, a cacophony, children crying, dogs barking, sleep runs, escapes me. Yes, thank you. So hold your applause till the end, please. So, shall I introduce the next one? We have the wonderful Kathy Huber. Do you want to introduce her, Rose?
Kathy?
Well, I think Rose said that we are going away with introductions today and just getting into the work that we're sharing.
Okay. I wanted to tell everyone what a wonderful writer you are, but okay.
Well,
we'll just dive right in.
let's all say that then. Kathy is a wonderful writer. And she's just finished this amazing book of the Collectia Roosevelt. And she's reading a poem she wrote for it.
Yes. And I actually, rather than giving you the background that I included for the PDF about writing, the history, I just thought I would show you the book, which is rather thick, and colors are just so much a part of the book from the design. That was over a year and a half of working with the designer and the team from the school and the people involved with it, that putting the whole thing together was sort of a fascinating project, not only because it's difficult to be able to try to condense 75 years into a narrative that makes sense, gives the overflow, and the thousands of people that are part of that story. It's only going to kind of skim the surface. But I realized that there was a very kind of special connection that I had over the years that I didn't realize as much until I was sitting down and working on the book, at how many people and names that I already knew from living in Peru, from having worked at the school, from having met my husband in New York and his friends who were from Roosevelt School, who all spoke such great English that it was hard to believe that it was their second language. And one of the things that always stuck out for me was the fact that they learned English reading the Dick and Jane books of the 50s, the 50s and the 60s, and See Spot run and See Spot chase squirrels. And they were like, what are squirrels? We've never seen squirrels before. Now in Lima, of course, there are squirrels, but they came in much later. But when I first came to Peru in 1986, I really did not speak much Spanish at all. And I really missed my English libraries and the New York Times book review. That was one of the things that I actually subscribed to for years. It came like 6 months later, arriving in the Peruvian mails. But it was kind of my lifeline to books and to writing. And I really valued that. And it wasn't until maybe 6 months after I lived there that I started meeting actual, American people in Lima who I could actually finally talk to without being embarrassed about stumbling over my words, trying to communicate something, where the whole conversation stops when you start trying to speak Spanish, because it's such a humbling kind of thing. And then I discovered the AWLC library, and I thought I had just come to paradise, because there were, walls of English, that I could access. I was thrilled. But soon after that, just as I was starting to get involved with the club, I started substitute teaching at Roosevelt. And while I was substituting there, the high school librarian left, and they needed a librarian, and I had history with working in libraries. And so I took the job full time at the Media Center, which was a brand new facility that was just absolutely wonderful. And I felt like I had just gone to paradise. So that whole piece of having that English dynamic in a country where I was still struggling so much with the language and getting used to the different cultures, it was just kind of a fabulous sort of thing. And also my first introduction to the AWLC cookbook, and that bilingual book that actually made me able to go out and shop, because I could find the words for the things I was looking for in the grocery store in that book. But working on the book was also a weaving together that I was thinking, one of the things I didn't share in the piece that I wrote for the PDF was the fact that there were so many overlaps with the AWLC. And I just wanted to mention some of those, because there are names that will be familiar to longtime members and maybe not to newer members. But the first Peruvian subdirector was an active AWLC member for most of her life, super active. She passed away in the early 2000s, but Inez Acosta de Ferguson was the first subdirector, the Peruvian liaison for that with the Peruvian government and keeping the Peruvian elements of the curriculum up to date. One of the first directors, 1946, the school started. By 50, we had Margaret Worthy was the director of the school. She had been the president of the AWLC in 1943. Lunita Lane, who ran the high school in the 50s, had been president of the AWLC in 1951. 1960 president Ruth Hedreen was really active at FDR as a parent, and her children were very active alumni for many years as well. Nancy Villalobos, who we all see here tonight, was a teacher at FDR, and she was also the AWLC president in 1987. Francesca Schwartz, who ran the FDR summer schools in the 1980s, was president of the AWLC in 88. Susan de la Torre Bueno, who was AWLC president from 2000 to 2003, was also very active in the Parents Association at school. So there are a lot of FDR leaders, teachers, principals, board members who have also overlapped with our club. Lisa Waller, who just passed away, who had been very active on the board of directors at the school. Linda Pasoldan, teacher and elementary school principal, super involved in FDR and has left a legacy there, as well as all of her activity in the AWLC, which she finally had time for once she retired. Diane Regatigui was president from 2013 and 2014, teacher, board member, Instituto member. Rosemary Aarons, AWC president 2015 to 16, was on the FDR board as well. Roberta Centurion was a teacher, English music coordinator, and left a legacy of incredible productions at the school. Patsy Rosenshine, one of the first students at FDR, is still, I think, considered a lifetime member of the AWLC. Helen Koenig taught kindergarten at FDR at one point. Carolyn Cunningham has been involved in the school forever, in the club quite a bit. And there are just so many overlaps that I thought it would be nice to share some of the book with the club as well. And I know that there are probably a lot of people there now who have children at the school. So as I was working on the book, I also wanted to really anchor it in time and place, as well as all of the historical things about the school itself. And I wrote a poem that was sort of out of some of the Peruvian traditions of the land. If you want, you can go ahead and scroll to that, because that's where I will go now. But in Andean culture, it's customary to make offerings to the earth, to Pachamama. And I wanted to offer some words in the spirit of that tradition and to honor the lands that have been home to both of the Colegio Roosevelt campuses. 75 years. Consider the years. Consider this place, the umbilical of a spinning planet, the edge of a landscape forged by the rise of the Andes, the brush of ocean currents and highland rains carving verdant valleys in their paths to the sea. Consider this brief blink in the march of cultures across the southern continent, the unnamed peoples reaching highlands and jungles, and this desert coastline, where the Lima culture thrived until the Wari until the Ichma until the Inca until the conquest. Consider our fraction of history, our own 75 years, less than 1/10 of the time since the Spanish incursion, over 1/3 since independence from foreign rule, half of that since La Guerra del Pacifico's loss, and fully here in the exhale of World War II. Consider the lands of our first 20 years, the realms of old Rio Rimac and the San Isidro Gardens, of 55 more with the tree-lined paths, once Hacienda Lores, where Rio Surco channels Rimac waters from the mountains far beyond, and distant flights of condors still feed the soul of this, our alma mater. So we give thanks for these places, these rivers, these stones, this earth, for the 75 years that they have nourished and sustained us. And we give thanks for all the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. That was beautiful. And Kathy can tell you where to obtain copies of this book, especially if you're in Lima. You should be able to get copies.
I'll
Next
let
up,
you check with Diane Riatigi. She's the connection with the school currently and was on the team that helped the book project come together.
Awesome. Thank you. So next we have 2 poems by the wonderful Jess Federley, and I have to promote her book, which now you can't see because I'm blurred. Just hot off the press.
Thanks, Tina.
She's
Yeah.
right here. And
Actually,
there's
really-
this lesser known author you might have heard of on the same page, Stephen King. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but I urge everyone buy the book. So take it away, Jeff.
thank you. Yeah, I'm really grateful to Dina because I'm in Peru, so I don't have a physical copy to hold up. But I was just published in, it's called Chiral Mad 5. It's a horror and science fiction anthology. And its table of contents includes Stephen King, Josh Malerman, who is the author of Bird Box, which was also a movie on Netflix. Victor Laval, who wrote The Ballad of Black Tom and The Changeling, and Zoji Sage, who just wrote Baby Teeth, and inexplicably me. I am also in this table of contents. It's almost unbelievable still. It's illustrated. It was edited by Michael Bailey, who's a Bram Stoker award-winning editor. I think he did a great job. And per Dina's really good marketing advice, I'm gonna drop my links in the chat, so they're in the chat. Thanks, Dina. And I have 2 poems for y'all that I hope are not too scary this time, but they're definitely October themed. The first one is called Different. Cool boys invited me, tube-socked and skinny, Saturday night to explore the abandoned amusement park. Some football jock drove us, no seatbelts, girls shrieking, the half hour up, and I was high on belonging, settling into that leather seat like I'd always known how beer smelled, like I'd never loved dragons or turtles, like my books had never been smacked from my hands by the boy belching nursery rhymes next to me. But not 10 minutes after a crooked park job, squeezing through the chained gates, I felt rain, heard male whispers. One of the girls said, "No." It happened fast. Metal doors groaned, hands shoved. Old gym shoes slipped on wet gravel. Slam, clunk. Find your own ride home, freak. My palms are skinned and sting. New clothes, soaked. Rain trickles into the puddle I sit in, slipping through the tin roof's cracks. In the dim, olive-colored space, distant thunder underlines my hiccups. It smells of moss and slimy wood, of something flowery. Dr. Tentle's freak show, says the faded sign, experiments gone wrong. It creaks over my head, sways on frayed hemp cords. What is it about being different that makes quiet creatures not mind your presence? I can't say. But when I realized what watched me from the 3rd room down, crouched in the dappled shadows, I knew I'd never seen such a lovely thing before. Skin like dragon scales, wide eyes, black and calm as a sea turtle's. Hyacinth, I think, is the mysterious scent. And my second poem is called Possession of the Farmer's Son. My pupils sizzle into pinpricks at the sudden light, corrugated roof peeling back like a tin can's lid. For longer than you think, I have lived in this fox body, loved darkness with my needle teeth, rolled in earth to hold its scent, screamed in winter at gently popping trees, stolen savory beating hearts buried deep in feathered bodies. Your son holds the lantern high, and I, caught and cornered, jaws locked around a chicken neck, wonder how long it has been since I was human, whether justice is still as tricky as knowing where to bite, and who left the boy's young face bruised as the flesh of a dropped peach. The gunshot is a hot and sulfurous orange, but the pain is already fading as I dive into the cool black pool of the boy's rapidly dilating eye. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess, for bringing us into Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Right. Next we have Nancy Villalobos with a memoir, excerpt from her memoir.
Yeah, so this is a tease. This is probably the beginning of chapter 2. So, you know, let's go for it. Okay. I keep trying to move it up and down and I don't have it. Okay.
Do that for you.
Yeah, you're doing it for me. Okay. As soon as I set foot on campus, I knew I wasn't in Indiana anymore. Down with American imperialism, no to Yankee intervention. The hand-lettered banners stretched across the low buildings of the Ciudad Universitaria, the new campus of San Marcos University in Lima, Peru. Stepping carefully over the still tacky red and black paint of "Leave Latin America to the Latin Americans" on the cement walkway, I followed my 19 fellow Indiana University students into the Facultad de Letras, the Fine Arts building. The view from the floor to ceiling glass wall to my left made it hard not to make comparisons with IU's towers of alabaster limestone, venerable deciduous trees, and lush, well-tended lawns. While these modern two-story buildings boasted large windows and impressive glass-enclosed staircases, the grounds were barren, dusty, and studded with trash. A reminder that nothing gets washed away in a desert coastal climate where it never rains. As much as I would have preferred the original colonial era site in downtown Lima, my foreign study program required me to spend the April to December academic year in this stark industrial zone at the end of Avenida Venezuela. From my place in a row of wooden seats midway up the tiered gallery, surrounded by the others in my group, I looked around. The Peruvians were at ease, happy to be back on campus with friends, while we sat stiffly and quietly, trying to blend in. As a group, we were hardly inconspicuous. We stood out for more than our complexions and our clothing. The presence of privilege defined us. San Marcos drew its students primarily from the lower middle class sections of the city, children of the disenfranchised, the aspiring but historically subjugated classes that were solidly urban, but with agrarian roots. Their education was the country's hope for the future. Suddenly, a noisy group led by a tall fellow waving a fistful of pamphlets burst in and filled the space at the foot of the hall. The audience went silent as the leader began an impassioned harangue, punctuated by some words I recognized: Estados Unidos and Santo Domingo, imperialismo and invasión. All around us, the Peruvian students clapped, shouted their agreement, and encouraged the speaker. I leaned over to Rita, one of the political science majors in my group. What does Santo Domingo have to do with Peru? Without shifting her gaze, Rita leaned closer and explained, they're protesting last week's U.S. invasion of the Dominican Republic. We broke a non-intervention treaty. Haven't you heard about the anti-American demonstrations downtown? It's been all over the news. No, I hadn't, but then I wasn't into politics. As a Spanish major, my reasons for being in Peru were: 1, to get away from Indiana, 2, to perfect my Spanish, and 3, to learn some new songs to play on my Mexican guitar. I had another question for Rita. Wasn't that the reason for the student strike that kept our classes from starting for 3 weeks? I whispered. This is about the invasion. The strike was protesting the arrest of one of the San Marcos professors during the earlier demonstrations. You really should pay more attention. I composed my face into a neutral expression, even though I was tempted to nod just a little bit. Not in agreement exactly, but rather in a pathetic attempt to blend in. But Rita's raised eyebrows nixed even that timid response. When at last the leader relaxed his arms and his voice and left the room, all the other students followed, taking their outrage with them. Class was over. We never found out what happened to our illustrious professor, Augusto Tamayo Vargas, but it wasn't unusual for a teacher to be a no-show. Professors posted their schedule of classes and meeting times, but enjoyed the autonomy to decide when to begin. I showed up 3 times before my Peruvian literature professor did. By the end of the month, however, the university had become a place of lectures, classes, and study, albeit without textbooks. Even after that angry demonstration the first day, our Peruvian classmates were friendly. Many were openly curious about our lives and why we were there. When we gathered in the noisy cafeteria to purchase the mimeographed copies of class notes that substituted for textbooks, the students smoking their smelly, unfiltered cigarettes and guzzling neon yellow Inca Cola repeatedly assured us, "We like you, we just don't like your country's politics." That confirmed the Department of State's admonition during our orientation week in Washington. Anti-American sentiment in Latin American universities isn't personal, it's political. Campus elections, however, soon interrupted the calm. The parties contending for seats in the Student Federation that year were, among others, the Communists, the Trotskyites, and the venerable left-wing Peruvian party APRA. Not surprisingly, the vitriol we witnessed earlier against U.S. foreign policy continued. Campaign banners again adorned the walls. At noisy rallies, students shouted and sang political slogans with the enthusiasm of an American high school football rally, but with potentially far-reaching results. The political parties at San Marcos, arguably the most radicalized university in Lima, which is why we were there, were affiliates of the national parties, and it was not unusual for the candidates for student offices to be adults, students only by virtue of their repeated matriculation. Holding office at the university often provided a jumpstart to a future political career. As foreign students, we were not obligated to vote, and since the election results did not affect our academic courses, we found the result intriguing but not threatening. As it turned out, the communists defeated the incumbent apristas, as members of the APRA party are known. The communist victory at San Marcos that year of 1965 presaged events that had begun to coalesce in the Southern Highlands. At the University of San Cristobal in the impoverished province of Ayacucho, a young university professor named Abimael Guzman was indoctrinated with the communist ideology that the social revolution in Peru would be agrarian. The country was not industrialized and had no workers, so the class struggle would take place in the fields. The results of that decision would affect my life directly in Peru for many years to come. Oblivious to all that political stuff, I was learning other things. There was the matter of Tito, the handsome 32-year-old son of my host family.
Thank you, Nancy. That was great. I love hearing your memoirs. I think you may have to explain mimeograph to some people. But that was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, next we're moving on to Deanna Bowie. She's going to present a poem about the Amazon.
Yes, I wrote this as just sort of to describe what I was seeing and feeling and hearing when I was in the Amazon. I wrote this about 20 years ago. And so it's just just sort of to take you there, to see, to give you a feel of what it might look like or feel or smell, whatever. And I hope I'm as good a reader as the ones before me. Oh my goodness, you guys are wonderful. So I entitled it The Amazon. The river is strong and fast. New trees, roots recently dislodged from the banks, go flying by, half in, half out of the water. Green leaves still on the branches, waving in the breezes. At high water, the collection of debris that has been resting on shore, including logs of every size and shape, gather together into the flow of this wide body of water. Boating becomes a formidable task of dodging one way, then another. For all the swiftness of the river, there is rarely a chop. Only the cool breezes before a rainstorm can ripple the waters. A coffee-colored river, appearing to be laced with cream, snakes through the vivid range of greens in the rainforest. Melting snow from deep and high in the Andes, bringing rich dirt from the creeks, streams, rivers, searches for the path in these waters, creating constant renewal, fertilizing all in its flow. The smooth, muddy bottom is ever changing with the currents, islands appearing and disappearing overnight. Riverbanks suddenly fall in chunks, taking all clinging to them, or silt and mud slowly rebuilding, setting the stage for the new growth. Skies ever changing over the Amazon, always a sight to behold. Rain off into the distance, 1, 2, 3 different places, or a downfall chasing you up the river, ready to dump buckets of water as quickly as it can and then move on, leaving all soaked and refreshed. Omnipresent cloud formations, all shades and sizes, appear from nowhere, then disappear into the mist. Although blue skies abound, it is the clouds that dominate, casting shadows or casting shades of light in all spectrums of grayness. Heat in the midday sun gives a feeling of intensity. Even shade from a palm frond brings relief. The air is thick and heavy with humidity, no breezes, dampness clings, ringlets of hair gather on the neck. Stillness causes intensity of sound from the insects and birds. Smells seem enhanced from the ever-present mildew to the wood-burning fires, fresh and old. The mixing of these odors permeates all, causing a jungle smell. The greens, every shade on earth, thousands of varieties of plants and trees, thick and enormous, delicate and exotic, make up this spectacular canvas. Amidst the greens is the occasional shock of bright red, or blue, or yellow, or all the endless combinations of primary colors, iridescent colors, rich colors, drawing your attention to the highlighted light. Could it be a flower or a bird that defies description? Maybe a poison frog. It might be insects marching in a line, butterflies quicker than the eye, fruit ripe on the vine, each one capable of providing a sense of wonder at this moment. Shades of brown camouflage and protect this forest, whether predator or prey. Beams of sunlight streaming through the canopy of trees cast shadows and ribbons of light, all dancing together to further the fusion of hues. In the quiet early morning light, the birds will awaken, singing and calling to each other in their distinctive voices. If you listen carefully, you can hear friends answer one another from tree to tree, taking in the sweetness of song to start the day. Monkeys frolicking in the treetops, swinging by arms, tails, and legs, chatter loudly to each other until they hear noises signifying danger. Then they stop, no noise or movement, becoming little statues, not seen, waiting for the threat to pass before they resume their play. Daylight will bring a flock of parakeets flying by, screaming and screeching, drowning out all other sounds. At dusk, insects create a symphony with frogs joining in on tempo. Caimans roar in the distance and owls add their particular wisdom. Spiders, tarantulas, scorpions, centipedes, ants. What else? Snakes, vipers, constrictors both. Many small creatures waiting to wreak havoc on your life. But of all, mosquitoes and chiggers are the frequent misery makers. Jaguars stealthily roam the jungle, huge quiet hunters, coats like velvet, the color of honey, spots black as midnight. Fast as lightning, strength shown in every movement, magnificent animals to be feared, yet they are cats rarely seen. Palms hang thick with coconuts, yellow and green bananas plentiful. Papayas are sweet and red, mangoes golden, swollen with juicy flesh. Breadfruit trees stand tall with their dark, broad leaves and fruit. Ripe paddies rise from nowhere as the river recedes, exposing rich soil. Chickens run free through the sugar cane, scratching for food. Pigs stroll with their piglets or roll in the mud to cool off. Skinny dogs constantly search for food, nosing through this and that. Herds of wild water buffalo stand in fields, picked clean by their grazing. Carving and shaping trees of every size produces canoes. Children are seen in the smaller ones, paddling quite deftly, near the shore or backwaters, not venturing too far. Women sitting cross-legged wash clothes at the river's edge. Fishermen head out in the early morning, nets in the bow. Standing on the edge of the boat, they cast, spreading a ring of disturbed water outward. Slowly they pull back, seeing what has been caught with their effort. Sometimes men in many canoes will work together with a larger net, hoping to catch a big fish that will feed a village. Fishing is serious business, the work of men, much depending on the success of each day's trip to feed their families. Children running, skipping, playing, laughing, happy children. They follow behind, they lead the way down the green jungle paths. They are quick to hold a hand or content to walk beside you, openly honest in showing affection. Their curiosity shines through. Young women, almost always with babes in their arm or at the breast, appear shy, yet have quick smiles and pretty faces. Older, wizened women speak confidently and sure, lifetimes of experiences qualifying them as leaders, those who know. Older men have wrinkled brown faces from years of work outside, faces that show gentleness of character and clear eyes that speak truth. Younger men hang back, wait and see, listen and learn. Lean bodies born of an honest day's work, day in, day out for a lifetime. Sunset leaves the sky stained crimson, draining into the purples of dusk. Cooking fires flicker in the huts, plume of smoke spiraling upward. At the edge of the river, bathers gather, men, women, children alike, cleaning their bodies of a day's work, refreshing both soul and spirit. Darkness of night arrives quickly, stars twinkling, thick as cream. Fireflies mimic the sky, so one does not know where the earth and sky join. As the moon starts its ascent upwards, the Southern Cross appears. Soon, rhythmic beating and throbbing of drums is felt as much as heard. Sometimes at dusk, when riding slowly down the river, at a time when images lose their color and only outlines remain, one scans the shore for signs of life. As eyes focus, natives can be seen standing on the riverbank, looking out to the water. Gazing upon the scene, one loses a sense of time. Which decade or even century do they belong? An ancient scene, short bronze people, black eyes, black blunt hair, half hidden in the bushes, standing quietly, side by side, watching.
That was beautiful. I feel like we're all there in the Amazon. Thank you, Deanna.
Thank you.
That was lovely. And you did a wonderful job reading, so it was beautiful. I feel like we all need to like breathe after the poem. All right, so now we're moving on to one of the stars of our group, Rose Poole, with
Unmute myself. Okay.
you
There we
unmuted
are.
yourself. So she has several, I'm gonna give you a little intro, Rose.
Anyway,
Several new
uh,
books out.
I'm reading
Gonna read
from
from them.
my latest books. That's poetry collection number 5 and 6. I have a 7th coming out next year, but I'll spare you the number 7. And I'm reading just a few poems from these 2 that have just been published. And the first one is, Do Oceans Have Underwater Borders? And at the end of these few, I will read you the title poem to make you smile. So don't despair, they might be a bit dark, but they get better. She had asked for a court order. The ice was singing under her wheels and deep inside her bones. She had chosen to drive north and north. The winter tires bit into the thin layer of snow which barely covered the glare, blinding her wherever the wind had swept the white dust from gelid roads, which had been a dull gray the night before. The thermostat said 3 below 0, the radiator barely getting the inside of the Subaru above that. She had left the gloves at the last motel. She vaguely wondered why her fingers were blue. She couldn't stop herself from moving at speed. No other cars were out on this Arctic bright Sunday morning. A murder of black rose into that white on white as she passed, startling her. She stepped on the brakes, leaning back, stiffening her arms. Low branches unloaded their winter weight. She could hear scratches on metal. It occurred to her that he'd be furious again, and that she wasn't ready for another beating. When the car sank slowly into the lake, the world became dark, and she thought with a smile that maybe she may have forgotten to turn off the stove. This is a bit gentler. A while back, she left me. She did it gently, slow at first, moved into that small room in the D wing of our local hospital. They have an annex for those cases. Don't mention the A word. Don't summon the demon by his true name. Each afternoon, visiting hours, I again become her suitor, the way I wooed her once. She calls me by my rival's name, but when I hold her close, she leans her head against mine, and we fall in love. He's losing words. It's a similar problem, but with different symptoms. They tumble from my keyboard. Words, lines, paragraphs, pages. Gifts for my father, my friend's father. She said, he's losing words. He remembers the weather. He'll have a weather for you, for her, and for him. You're worried about your son's drinking habit. He says, there will be precipitations. For or against euthanasia, the tempers run high. He says, easterly winds of up to 80 kilometers per hour expected. Then he looks up, frightened, bites his cheeks, asks his hands, where are my words? Checks his synapses, looks at Prussian blue horizons, cloud formations bunching up across the contrail, pixelated, somewhere beyond Orion. So now I hope I leave you with a smile after this book. Do oceans have underwater borders? Do mermaids speak Indian or Atlantic? How do the waters know where to turn back? How do turtles who don't take a blind bit of notice know where they are? Perhaps there is a Pacific border police. No salmon allowed beyond this point. Can you make out the different oceans from space? What is Gaia's name for South China Sea? As the whales breach from north to south and back again, I imagine them saying in deep whale-sized voices, thank God, Hubert, they didn't ask for our passports when we crossed into the Arctic Sea. Then the next ones are from the very, very, very latest, the number 6, Whistling in the Dark. And they're very much dark poems. I try to spare you the worst. So I start with a haiku. All that remains, a murmur of atoms taking off in graceful denial of their former bonds. Waterways. The green girl waited at the pier, hovered around the black pylons, wet and rotting, lashed by the waves, painted in abstracts by Simos. Fernando pushed out his boat, young, brown, muscular, and carefree. The birds screeched in anticipation of his return. Sea lions pretended not to notice. Nets neatly rolled, ready for an early winter catch, or a lamp in the bow. She slid into the lancha, undulated, coiled beneath the tackle. Weeks later, they found him washed up on the beach near Turtle Rock, a smile on his blue lips. And this is what happened after Jane Eyre said, yes, reader, I married him. Epilogue found in the diaries of the widow Rochester. Yes, reader, I married him. A short while after our son was born, his obsessions began, and I recognized his first wife's despair. Edward, even though no longer completely blind, did not ever fully regain his sight and distrusted the world and me. My marriage became darker and darker until I reverted to calling him Mr. Rochester. At moments, it was as though a beam of sunlight filtered through the curtains of foreboding, and I would take heart, only to be plunged once more into the deepest gloom. One starless night, Mr. Rochester fell off his horse and broke his neck. Since then, guilt has been my companion, and melancholy covers me like a heavy blanket. Still, I can hear my children playing under the trees. Occasional laughter drifts my way. We are blessed. This one is called Heimweh is More Than a Flesh Wound. Geography is not important. Everywhere, is the operative word. Bared sole, barefoot, bare. Tread carefully. Mind your underbelly. Be a turtle. Carry the essence in your holdall. No roots allowed past the security check. They can see with their X-ray machines. You carry a sharp, merciless switchblade made of stainless grief. That's it.
Thank you, Rose. Wonderful as always. And where can we find your books, Rose?
I'm going to put it into the chat.
Thank you. Next up, we have Charlotte. Charlotte, can you unmute yourself?
Well,
There we go. All right. With a memoir, part of a memoir. Can you see it okay?
I just came back from a 6-month trip, and this started out as an email that I sent to the Lima writing group, as I would do periodically when I would get inspired by something that had happened on my trip. So I wrote this in July. Right, shortly after I left my home on Whidbey Island. And I just called it A Week with Elvis, from Whidbey Island to Vienna. My writing is often inspired by what is happening in the here and the now. This past week, I've been thinking about Elvis and his music. This interest began last Saturday on the terrace of Whidbey Island's Useless Bay Golf Course, where an Elvis impersonator performed. A week later in Vienna, Austria, I decided to see the new film about Elvis's life and times. Afterwards, I walked home at midnight along the quiet, tree-lined Mittelstrasse. I reflected on the film and the memories it prompted. The strains of Slavic languages accompanied my stroll. Raindrops began to fall, and the refreshing aroma of an unexpected summer storm entered my nostrils. At the end of the street, I crossed the 3-lane girdle into the 15th district. The wind picked up and whipped around the buildings. I hastened home, arriving just in time to see fierce lightning strikes across the evening sky from the roof garden. During my stroll, my thoughts turned to my childhood in Peru, when Elvis had become an American icon on the global stage. I loved the sound of his music and the stories he told about growing up in the American South. One of my childhood memories of Peru that has stayed with me into adulthood was a 4th of July gathering of American expats at the airport, shouting greetings through a wire fence to then Vice President Richard Nixon as he descended from Air Force One. He ignored our cheers. Later, in my opinion, he got his comeuppance for his rudeness when he was pummeled with rotten tomatoes on entering the government palace. His behavior as a representative of our government had been shameful and embarrassing. I have been similarly embarrassed many times through my life by other American leaders. My parents certainly influenced my thinking, my values, and less successfully, my behavior. As I reflect on Elvis, as he was in the 50s and the 60s, I believe the way he lived his life also contributed to solidifying my character traits. I feel like this writing exercise is an archaeological dig into my mind as I peel away the strata of my thinking, personality, and behavior. It seems appropriate to a visitor of Vienna, full of reminders of Freud. I would like to think my values were partly derived from those of my parents and reiterated each Sunday in my father's sermons. Such lessons were also undoubtedly crammed into the long and tedious talks I listened to as a child under a giant circus tent on a beach south of Lima, where I attended Bible camp each summer. Further excavating my character and personality development, I recall a rebellious streak settling in. I like to think that this was in part inherited from the Scotch-Irish ancestors I so recently researched with a great nephew, Sol. Such behavior may have had something to do with the way my life evolved. Rebellion characterized my generation and that of Elvis before me. Having me out of the house for those few short 2 weeks undoubtedly brought my parents relief from the irritating behavior of a soon-to-be teenager. I can still feel the heat of tropical sun beating down on that canvas tent. I also feel the constant trickle of perspiration down my back and the sensation of being suffocated while the rules and regulations of our faith droned on. Eventually, when I could no longer bear such discomfort, I would sneak out from under the tent flap and race to the shore for a swim. I remember the cooling sensation of the fierce Pacific waves on my skin. Only later would I become aware of the dangerous undertow those waves brought when my father drowned at the beach at Ancon. Luckily, he was revived by a doctor and a dentist from our congregation who were there for our regular Sunday afternoon church picnics. I learned the details of that fateful afternoon when visiting a fellow member of the American Women's Literary Club. Some 50 years later, we were enjoying a delightful summer lunch, looking out over a lush tropical garden. Some 50 years later, I asked my friend's husband if he had known my father. And he replied, "Yes, I saved his life." Now, Elvis came from an even deeper Southern background than that of my parents. Historically, half of the population of Kentucky were referred to as rebels. During the bloody Civil War, those rebels fought their brothers, supporting the Union side of the conflict. My ancestors fought on both sides. I soon learned that conflict has no right or wrong, nor are things simply black and white. I learned that understanding conflict comes from seeing the shades of gray of human behavior, rather than passing judgment on the right and the wrong or the black and white of any quarrel. This thinking has seeped into my adult way of viewing the world. However, those early parental admonitions in Peru or spoken under the circus tent on the Peruvian beach were not unlike the messages delivered in the revival tents portrayed in the film about Elvis. Other scenes from the film reminded me of his times, how people dressed, how they wore their hair, and their beautiful classic cars. The pink Cadillac Elvis bought his mother reminded me of the green Pontiac that accompanied us for the 6 years my family lived in South America. Women wore elaborate bouffant hairdos in the 60s. Such hairdos were forbidden by the Navy when I was serving at St. Albans Naval Hospital from 67 to 69. However, that rule didn't keep me from wearing my hair wrapped around a net tube and stuffed under the nursing cap I wore to work. I suspect that behavior represented my rebellion against what I saw as an unfair and war being imposed on the youth of my country. Sorry, I'm going to have to move. The lights impeding my vision.
That's fine.
I'll now fast forward and write of an encounter
Charlotte, can you unmute yourself? I muted you by accident. Sorry. Go ahead, sorry.
I wasn't expecting the sun to come in quite that brightly. I was seated at the hospital waiting room beside a man in a wheelchair and his daughter. Gradually, as my emotions settled, my ears tuned into their conversation about caregiving. Their talk distracted me from my own worries. I learned that the vet's years of service had been from 56 to 63. He was discharged after spending a year in a full body cast because of a helicopter disaster. He'd been assigned to investigate the inland waterways of Vietnam in anticipation of an American invasion. He added that others from all the services had been similarly engaged since 1956. Their reports were sent up the chain of command to Hawaii, where the top brass reviewed them and made recommendations to the Pentagon. They reportedly argued that under no circumstance should the US become embroiled in another conflict in Asia, having just withdrawn from Korea. The veteran concluded his story by saying that the White House disregarded the Pentagon's recommendations and rushed our country into yet another hopeless war. Thinking back on Elvis's time, I remembered we were also fighting another civil war on the domestic front. That war once again pitted Black against white and North against South. I recalled the trauma all Americans experienced when JFK was assassinated in Texas. At the time, I'd been a freshman in TCU's marching band in nearby Fort Worth. I learned that the president had been shot while on the band's bus destined to accompany him on his journey through Dallas. Grief associated with that national tragedy was further compounded some years later when Bobby Kennedy and still later JFK, Martin Luther King were assassinated. In sum, the film about Elvis's life prompted me to think backwards in time to my childhood in Peru, my teenage years in New York City, where I did not feel I belonged either then or now, and my college years where racism was rampant and the bad guys were the Spanish-speaking Mexicans who shared a culture I identified with. After college in 1967, I happily returned to New York, even though I owed the next 2 years in service to the US Navy. My joining the service had initially seemed like a reasonable way to pay for my final year of college. Little did I know what that decision would bring. It was a hard way to learn how to become a nurse. I experienced the trauma of caring for broken bodies delivered daily by helicopters on the hospital front lawn. I also recall how my brother was hounded by a draft board throughout his college days after he claimed conscientious objector status. Moving back to New York in '67 provided some relief from the prejudice many Texans expressed towards Mexicans with whom I identified and shared a language. The rebellious streak of my college days miraculously did not result in my being expelled from college. So I think some parts that I had deleted somehow crept back into this version.
Charlotte, you sent me this per email with very strange symbols, but what you sent me per email, I put in. So you probably put them back in.
Well, I'm having a hard time seeing the screen, so I'll just keep on. Power was another theme explored in the film about Elvis. The film underscored that injustice occurs when power is misused. Those that rebel against injustice, like myself and my father before me, are challenged to figure out effective ways to resolve conflict. My evening of film began with a late lunch of pulled pork barbecue and coleslaw in the outdoor restaurant of Vienna's Furniture Museum. This respite in the museum's garden was on my first stop on the way to the Haydn Kino, where the new Elvis Presley film was being shown. By then, the stores, yeah, there's a lot. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to just skip over a number of these paragraphs that were deleted and somehow reappeared. So I'll just go to the conclusion. These musings over the events of the day and the Elvis film made me realize that there has been a pattern to my travels that inevitably brings me to Vienna. I wonder if this trip if this stop has become a metaphorical oasis on longer journeys to more distant destinations along the Silk Road. Has Vienna become for me like an oasis was for Ibn Battuta, a 12th century adventurer who also journeyed up and down the routes linking Europe and Asia and beyond? So that's it. Sorry for the mistakes.
No worries. Charlotte's, I'm amazed. Charlotte is actually in the United States right now because the past year she's been jumping from one continent to another. But thank you for sharing that. So we're coming the last two writers, we have Lisa Sassio. It's a poem for us. Where's Mahina? There she is.
I just came across this. I wrote this many years ago, and I was looking for something on my computer and came across this a few weeks ago, just as we were talking about doing this this program, and I debated for a couple weeks whether I would have the courage to read it or not. I've never read it out loud. I've never read it to anybody. I've never shown it to anybody. And I guess I'm a little shy about reading out. But anyway, alone in the darkness, I looked around me and I saw those who were lost. I let my heart go out to them, and I felt their empty souls. I went to hold them near to me, but the distance was too great. In vain I called the names I knew. I could not talk, they could not hear. I turned to go about my way. If fate would hold them, I could not stay. But through the mist, I heard them call. With anguished cries, they made me turn. I saw the tears of youthless eyes and felt the shivering of swollen hearts, the weight of death upon their backs. And then I knew I must go back. Those virgin souls must never know of loss, of fear, of pain and emptiness. They needed guidance to their paths. And so it was, I went to them before they knew that I had gone.
That was wonderful, Lisa. Thank you for being brave and sharing with us. Really, that was
Very beautiful.
just beautiful, lovely. And
It makes me tear up a little.
that's the sign of a good poem. Feel the emotion. Thank you. And our final reader today, we have the wonderful Patsy Salazar, The Amazon Forest. Patsy, can you unmute yourself?
I just did.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay, the Amazon forest. DV Peru is a nonprofit organization that has health projects in several villages along the Napo River, a tributary of the Amazon. In 2012, I went on one of their trips to translate for dentists from Canada and doctors and medical students from England who had come to volunteer. Dr. Vera from the US, who had gone before, and Renzo, one of the founders of DB Peru, went with us. And as a parenthesis, I think most of you must know that Diana Bowie is the DB, and this is her nonprofit. Incredibly admirable. But this is my experience.
You're muted, Patsy, somehow again. Sorry. I didn't do it. There you go.
Do I start over?
The
How
trip
can I-
began with an early flight. We got to that.
Okay. The trip began with an early flight from Lima to Iquitos, followed by a quick open-air breakfast in its picturesque Plaza de Armas. We then walked over to the nearby Amazon to embark on the ride to the Explorama Lodge located on the Napo. As we approached the river, I looked down at a little boat that resembled an overgrown rowboat with a motor and a roof perched on top, and wondered if this was the one that would take us to the lodge. We went down some wooden stairs toward the river and confirmed that it was. The boat seated about 20 passengers. We boarded and almost immediately were off on our Amazon River trip. Not too long after leaving Iquitos, we found ourselves at the point where the Napo flows into the Amazon, and we were all awed by the vast expanse of water we beheld before us, where the two rivers joined. One thing is to be told how big the Amazon is, and another is to actually be on it in a boat and come to the realization that you're in the jungle on a river and not somewhere out in the middle of the ocean. The beauty of the rivers and the unending forest which lines them left a deep impression. The isolation of the few villages we could see along the shores was underlined by how few boats of any size we passed going in either direction. I began to realize just how huge the Amazon is, and to appreciate the immensity of its beautiful, enigmatic rainforest. We finally arrived to the lodge, tired but grateful after the 3-hour river ride, and were welcomed by the lodge employees who served us our first Amazon lunch, grilled paiche, which is a fish, palmito salad. They informed us that the dining room was the social meeting area, and that electricity and Wi-Fi were only available there. This led to everyone competing to plug in their cell phones, inevitably an ongoing competition from then on during the whole stay. We quickly left our bags in our rooms still unopened and returned to join in the canopy walk that had been organized as a welcome by the lodge. This is a walk along a tree trunk walkway built expressly by the lodge for its guests. As I followed the others up steep steps amid the trees that surrounded the lodge, I was fascinated by the unidentifiable jungle sounds. And then as we came to the top, we suddenly had a view of miles and miles of green treetops, the jungle's canopy, reaching as far as our eyes could see. We began walking along the swaying walkway, soaking in the vastness and beauty that surrounded us. Some of us would stop to take photos, but in general, most of us continued walking until suddenly everyone in unison stopped. And as I looked around me, I saw that the majority of my companions had their eyes glued to cell phones. One of the younger generation had suddenly discovered that he could connect to Wi-Fi. Our walk paused while just about everyone connected. It was so bizarre to be miles from civilization, above the treetops of the jungle, with a group of mostly young adults chatting on their phones. I sensed the tremendous isolation one experiences in the rainforest, where connecting to a cell phone becomes an exciting experience. But the jungle's magnificence was winning me over. My cell phone never left my pocket. We returned to the lodge, socialized for a while, had another typical jungle meal, sang together with one of the volunteers who played the guitar, and as bedtime approached, we were shown again to our rooms. Alone in my room in the darkness of night, surrounded by the many jungle noises, I was again overwhelmed by the sense of isolation one feels in the jungle. We had flashlights, and with mine, I unpacked briefly and left my room to venture a trip to the bathrooms. I achieved the purpose of the trip, albeit very uncomfortably, and returned to my room and the solitude of my first night in the jungle. After quickly changing into my light pajamas, I squeezed under the mosquito netting into my bed as quickly as possible to avoid being accompanied by mosquitoes, snuggled under the sheets, and began listening to the music so characteristic of the jungle, wondering which jungle creature each melody belonged to. Was I hearing only insects, or were there monkeys perhaps, or other jungle animals taking part in the chorus? I wondered if each of these creatures was alone. I wondered how interconnected each creature was with others, and not only of their own species, but of other species. I marveled at the fact that so many different creatures survived in an environment so different from the one I survived in. And I reflected on the immensity, not only of the Amazon jungle and its rivers, but also of the infinite amount of life that exists there. And I realized I was not isolated in the true sense of the word, as I had first felt, but surrounded by an amazing symphony of life. It was difficult to sleep with all these thoughts swirling around in my head, but the jungle concert was soothing. And as I listened to it and savored it, I eventually did. Next, we woke up serenaded by the same unending jungle concert and accompanied as well by a sweltering heat, which I hadn't really noticed before. After a cold shower and a wooden stall, I wrapped up in my towel and hurried back to my room to dress as quickly as possible to avoid getting eaten by the ever-present mosquitoes. Despite the heat, we had been warned to defend our arms and legs with long sleeves and long pants and lots of repellent. This done, I grabbed a bag containing thick rubber boots bought in the market, requisite gear for the trip, and went back to the lodge, ready for breakfast and the day ahead. Dr. Vera took the lead by explaining how we were to proceed. Among other things, this involved carrying a large number of boxes of supplies, many of them brought and donated by the volunteers, down to the lodge's deck to load onto the launch waiting for us. Once we accomplished this, we loaded ourselves onto the boat as well and took off. Again, I was mesmerized by the beauty of the river and its forest. After maybe half an hour, we arrived to our first village. From the river, we could see an open area with small houses, more like huts, on both sides, and a large building at the back. This was a schoolroom 2 weeks every month, available to use the other 2 while the students were home with their families. As we drew near, children ran down to the river and happily greeted us, ready to help us unload. Since now the river was rather low, it rises and falls 16 meters every year, unloading meant wading through mud to access solid ground. So at this point, I donned my rubber boots. We formed a human chain, most of us standing in the mud, and passed the boxes of supplies along to the men and children, anxiously waiting to carry them to the rustic schoolroom where villagers were already lined up to be attended. Once everything was unloaded, we waded through the mud to solid ground. Like our rooms at the lodge, the schoolroom had a roof, but was open to the air and the bugs of the jungle. It was a building of flimsy construction, furnished with the schoolroom's worn benches and tables. Dr. Vera began giving instructions as to how to organize everything. And soon each doctor had a table for consultations and each dentist a chair for tending patients. Before DB Peru, the villagers had never before seen a doctor or dentist. To do so would have meant a 3-hour boat ride to Iquitos, and not a viable possibility for the majority of them. The resignation with which they accepted this situation was incredible to me. Yet in their resignation, there was no sign of resentment or complaint. Their humility and simplicity was heartwarming. They waited in line patiently to be attended, many for the first time ever. One villager arrived with 16 BB shots in his back, inflicted by a neighbor who thought he had stolen a chicken. He had had them encrusted there for 6 months, and the 16 wounds were all infected. Dr. Vera immediately took command of the situation. asked us to cover one of the benches with a sheet, recruited some of the dentists as her assistants, and proceeded to remove the 16 BB shots and disinfect the wounds, one by one. I wondered if eventually the infections wouldn't have become life-threatening. As I translated complaints to the doctors and dentists, I wondered why the villagers would accept the interventions of strangers with whom they couldn't even communicate by themselves. It helped considerably that now we had with us a doctor from Iquitos, as well as Dr. Vera, who both could communicate in Spanish to clear doubts when necessary. Maybe too, the clearly very good will with which the volunteers worked helped to dispel doubts. In any case, the morning passed amazingly quickly. We broke for a box lunch, but went back to work as soon as we finished. The line of villagers waiting to be attended still quite long. One of these was a young man who had a boil on the back of his knee, which was at least the size of a tennis ball, maybe even a baseball. We again set up the bench with its sheet. Dr. Vera again assembled her team of dentists to assist her, and she removed the ugly appendage. As the afternoon waned, we repacked the remaining supplies, preparing for the village we would visit in the following days, and enlisted the children to help us carry everything back to the waiting boat. Again, we passed the boxes along our human chain in the mud from the land to the boat, and once all was stowed on board, we boarded ourselves and started the return trip to the lodge. The children waving goodbye to us as we moved back into the river is an image I will always remember. The succeeding days passed similarly, and the final day as we started our return to Iquitos and then Lima, I treasured the last look at the beautiful rivers and their forest. I took with me memories of an experience that left me echoing Louis Armstrong. What a wonderful world. And that's it.
That was wonderful, Patsy. Let's have a round of applause for all the writers and speakers. All did a great job. Rose, do you have any? You're muted.
I unmute myself and then I get muted again. Can you stop sharing?
Yes, I can.
Ah, there we are. Now we
There's
can see each
another.
other. This was brilliant.
Yes.
You can all unmute yourselves now because we finished reading, so we can hear the dog and the husbands and whoever, it doesn't matter.
That was amazing. And I have to tell you what I did earlier, I guess yesterday afternoon when we got the final, I printed it all out and I'm taking it to, someplace to be put together and spiral bound so I can keep it forever, because I think this is an incredible collection of writing from our Peruvian members. I'm just overwhelmed and honored to have been included.
Nancy, yours was brilliant. It was lovely.
Yeah.
They all were. I mean, every single one of them. I of course I had the best seat in the house because I had to make the PDF. What I suggest, Nancy, because we had a problem with Charlotte's contribution because it came last minute with edits, I think I would, before you print it and keep it forever, I would rather talk to Charlotte about what she wants to keep and what she wants to leave out. And then there were some very strange symbols in the email that once translated to Word, they become googly-goog.
Right.
And I didn't have time to actually iron out all of these. So I promise I sent you the final PDF after we've done that.
Oh, it's lovely.
Rose, I think the final PDF you sent was fine. I just, with my vision problems, I couldn't read the
No,
little
no, no.
tiny
There were
print.
some
Well-
things, there were some things in there
There's some,
where an apostrophe in your email becomes a blah, 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 blah in Word. And it's like
Must
somebody
be the
said, it-
legacy of my trip down the Silk Road and the computer problems.
somebody wants to say a dirty word and instead you get all these different symbols. So at least I clean it up. At least I clean it up.
No, this is just fabulous, fabulous.
yeah, it was great. We traveled around the world today, so that was awesome. And to everybody's imagination.
I would like to thank Rose for getting us the idea of doing this. She put together the idea that she would like to do this, and all of a sudden we had this beautiful evening. So thank you, Rose, and thank you, Dina, for sort of being the
Well,
hostess.
thank you all for accompanying me so beautifully. I'm impressed.
It's, yeah, it's always different when you read your writing to a group, a big group. So thank you for being here.
Yeah.
And for those of you who spoke here for the first time, I hope it will encourage you to try again.
Thank you so much to everyone. I don't know if you can hear me, but
Yes.
for
You
your
can.
courage. It's very difficult to reach inside your memories, your lives, your thoughts, your fantasies, and kind of make them come out to others. So thank you very much. It takes courage.
Thank you. And
Thank you for listening. You know, if you read, you need listeners. If you give, you need takers. So what would we do without the listeners? So thank you all. As far as I'm concerned, you've been wonderful.
Thank you.
Must be repeated next year.
Yes, next year. And then we do it properly again, like a kaleidoscope event. And you know, what is properly? I don't know. Tonight was perfect.
Yes, I need to add another congratulations to Rose because it always
Yes.
boils down to who's willing to put in the time and energy to pull it together. Because there's so much talent and so much possibility, but it really takes a lot of work to make it happen. So thank you again, Rose, for
yes.
nagging us and pulling us and encouraging us and getting us all together for this evening.
I thought you'd never talk to me again.
No, even though we all were saying we're too busy, she's like, who's gonna be there tonight?
Well, no, the worst wasn't when you said too busy. The worst was when you didn't say anything. When I sort of wrote an email into the void.
Mm.
And it came back. So that was good. That was good. Lovely.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Night.
being
Thank you.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you all soon.